Hey everyone, welcome to another BTM screencast. Today we're going over Chapter 67 in the Carpentry textbook, Gypsum board, also known as drywall. So there's different types of gypsum board. The first that we're going to be using is the regular, which we have in lab, the eased edge, which we'll get more into, the Type X fire code board, which for this class we really don't need to know about, the water resistant, so this is what you usually use in high moisture areas such as your bathroom, around your kitchen, but we won't be getting into that. The special purpose, you can forget about that one. And the veneer plaster base, and same with that. You don't need to worry about that. So we're going to be focusing on the regular and the eased edge. So here's an example of what that looks like. On here, the drywall that we have in the lab is just like this. It has your tapered edge, so that way when we have our joints between the two, now it's not quite this exaggerated, but it's still close. And the reason for that is so that we can have a nice flush finish right here after we apply our tape. And our tape is going to be right across this joint. And of course, our joint compound. The eased edge is similar to that, but instead of it being hard edge like that, it's smoothed off. So size of gypsum panels. So in lab, the ones that we're going to be using are 4 feet by 8 feet. But there's also other ones to be aware of. So they generally go from 8 to 12 feet long for these that are 2 feet wide. These are the ones that we're going to focus on. They're 4 feet wide, as I said, and they come in lengths of 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, and 16 feet. We're going to focus on these in the lab, like I said before, so the 4 by 8 sheets, same as the plywood. The thicknesses go from 1/4 inch to 1 inch, and here we're going to be using and installing 1/2 inch drywall. Cement board, so you guys might have come in contact with this and earlier in the year when you laid tile in the lab. So it has a core of Portland cement reinforced with a glass fiber mesh embedded in both sizes. It's used in high moisture areas such as tubs and showers, so perfect for tile applications. Standard size is 1/2 inch thick, 32 or 36 inches wide, and 5 feet long. So I want you to take a second and think about the board that you used for your tile application in your booth, and what was the size of that? So here's an example of what that looks like. Now, the one that we used in lab is slightly different. This has the tape in it, the mesh. We didn't have that in ours. It was a different type. But you still have the smooth side, and on the inside it has the cement core. Drywall fasteners, so they're specially designed, nails and screws. Don't worry about the nails. We won't be using those in the lab. What we will be using are the screws. And the screws that we're using, because most of the applications that we have are into wood, are 1.5 inches. That's because we're going into the studs and it's also 1/2 inch thick drywall. Using the correct fastener is extremely important for proper performance. If we would end up using the wrong one, there's a chance that the drywall could actually become detached, especially if it's hung vertically from the ceilings. That can really pose an issue. You don't want to be sleeping and look up and all of a sudden you have drywall getting ready to land on you. The corrosion resistant fasteners are needed with water resistant gypsum board or cement board. So again, on this one, I want you to think back to the fasteners that you used when you installed tile in your booth. What kind were they? Were they water resistant? And it's always important to drive the fastener straight and at right angles to the wall board. Now, this seems like it's common sense, right? But let's say that we're fastening to this. And if we go in at a right angle, our fastener could end up going, let's say, this deep. If we end up driving it this way, and it's the same one, that same length fastener might only go that far because it's driving on an angle, right? So if you think about that, it's kind of the same idea when we do our triangles for laying out. So if we had this triangle, let's just make it an easy 3, 4, 5. If we had a fastener, for example, that was at 3 inches, and we wanted to drive it into this wall, if we drive in at a 90-degree angle, which this one is, we'd be able to go in 3 inches. But if we have that same 3-inch fastener and we drive on this angle, you can see that the fastener would only reach 60% of the way. Again, that's not acceptable. Nails. Nails should have flat or concave heads that taper to thin edges at the rims. Again, we're not going to be using these, so don't get too concerned on that. They do have smaller diameter shanks. Again, it's good to know, but we won't be using them. Use nails with annular ring shanks. Same thing. Good to know, but we won't be using them in the lab. Heads are driven below surface into a dimple. So this is going to be the same with your screws. You want to make sure that when they're driven, let's say that this is your drywall, you want a slight dimple in here, right? And it's the same idea when we do our screws, that you want it recessed slightly. That way when you apply your compound, you can get a nice flush finish and you won't see the fasteners. So here's an example of what some of those look like. Again, it's good to become familiar with them and know that they're out there, but we won't be using these for drywall applications in the lab. So here's an example of what that looks like. Here's a stud. Here's a wall board. Obviously, this is the nail. They don't have it labeled, so let's label it. And this is the dimple that we're talking about. So you can see with this recessed here, once we apply the joint compound, it'll go right over the head of that. And it'll give us a nice smooth finish, so when we paint, it'll look solid. Screws. Special drywall screws are used. They have a Phillips head designed for use with a drywall power screwdriver. Now, you can use that. You can also use a drill. You can use an impact. If you're doing it all day, using the specific drywall one is very helpful. Different kinds of drywall screws are used for fastening into wood, metal, and gypsum panels. So for us, we're going to focus strictly on the wood and the metal. So if we're going into the wood, we're going to be using coarse thread, 1 5/8 inches. If you have metal studs done, then you're going to be using fine thread, 1 1/4 inches. And these will be self-tappers, meaning that they will drive themselves. You don't need to drill a hole into the steel stud. They just go in by themselves. So here's an example of a professional installing drywall. This is the drywall screw gun that we were talking about. So you could run these things wide open, and as soon as you push onto it, then it engages the screw. So it's not running all the time. The bit isn't spinning all the time. It's only when you put pressure on it that it'll end up driving. So here's some examples of different screws that you'd be using. So again, you can see that this and this, these are your self-tappers for the metal studs. And this is one for your typical wood framing. Again, these that we're going to be using are 1 5/8 inches coarse thread, and these 1 1/4 inch fine thread. Don't worry about these, we won't be going into gypsum panels. So there's different types of adhesives that you can use: drywall adhesives, stud adhesives, laminating, joint compound, and contact adhesives. So here we could see this guy here, he should have glasses on. Those are safety glasses. He's putting liquid nails on here. And the reason that's helpful, so right here is an example of the cement board. The reason that this is helpful is it'll come in contact. So sometimes, and you guys have probably run into this when you're framing your walls, that our studs aren't exactly perfect, right? They could look something like that. So if you go and you put a nice straight manufactured panel on it, there's going to end up being little gaps in between in some spots. And what the drywall adhesive in this case does is it helps fill some of those gaps. So it'll actually come in contact as an adhesive going all the way down. So then not only will you be gluing right to the wall and help close in some of that gap, you'll also have the mechanical fasteners of your drywall screws going through. So this will add to some durability. In conclusion, there's several types of gypsum board. Again, the one that we're going to be using, 1/2 inch, 4 foot by 8 foot. Gypsum board comes in a variety of sizes. Again, this is the one that we're going to be focusing on in the lab. Cement board is used in high moisture conditions, right? So like bathroom, right? Perfect area for it. And again, think back to the tile that you did in your booth. Using the correct fastener adhesive is extremely important. Again, because you don't want to be laying in bed and all of a sudden you see drywall coming down. Applying the correct fastener adhesive should be done with care. So remember, when your fasteners, 90 degrees. That's it. If you guys have any questions, you want to go over anything, keep in mind that there's also a performance assessment with this. So if there's any additional questions, schedule a time and we'll go over it. See you next time.